Well, thanks for joining us for this week's collective conversation. This past weekend, we celebrated both Good Friday and Easter with a total of 5 virtual gatherings, which is more than we originally were planning for. We originally were going to have 3 physical gatherings, but we had 5 online, 2 on Friday and 3 on Sunday. And just we've heard so many stories of how God worked, of new people who came and accepted Jesus, and just stories of life change. And it's just exciting to see how even in this season where so many things are different, so many things have changed, so much about life doesn't look normal, it doesn't feel normal, that God is still at work, God is still moving, God is still using you, using us, using the church to meet needs, to meet people where they are, and meet them quite literally where they are, usually in living rooms and in homes. And so much from this weekend to talk about. As we were talking about before we hit the record button, Mark, several people have said, this was not just the best message in a while, but Sunday especially, but Good Friday too, maybe the best message they've ever heard. And so we're giving Mark a hard time about making sure that this weekend will be a good one too. But Harley, you had something you wanted to share, something you were talking about that really stuck out to you from this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Like Friday and Sunday, but especially Sunday, I don't think that Mark ever mentioned the word grace, but that's the only thing that kept coming to my mind, like throughout the whole thing as we walked through the book of Matthew, and like knowing that Jesus' disciples were walking with him and like they messed up, they screwed up, and he's still standing there like, here's this grace, come get it. Like, and it's just like so freely given. And I was even looking through Proverbs, and there was a verse that really stuck out to me. It's Proverbs 16:9. It says, "A person's heart plans his way, but the Lord determines his steps." And it kind of made me like think about Mark's message, and I wrote down like God's plan allowed them to plot. It's like He allows us to do that. He allows us to mess up, and all the bad things that we do or the bad choices. Like He's still there with that grace, and He works through that plan, and like his plan will prevail ultimately. And I just thought it was really cool because like flipping through my 30 pages of notes here, like I just kept writing grace because like it just like when I think of grace, I think of Jesus just standing there like with his arms wide open, like come get it. Like it's here no matter what you do, no matter how far you go, like I'm still right beside of you. And I think that is very evident, especially like in Peter's life. And it's something I had never really like looked all that much into. So I just think that's really powerful.
Yeah, that's good. Mark, you talked about Peter, and I was thinking about that while I was listening to the message. And in Israel, in Jerusalem, right outside of the old city, I had a chance to go a couple years ago, and there's where it's believed that Peter denied Jesus. There is a church that stands that's been there for centuries. And on the top of that church, rather than a steeple or a cross or anything of the sort, is a rooster, which really sticks out because there are churches and synagogues all over the area, but there's a rooster on top. And it really struck me that was there's actually a lot that went on in that space. And but what's remembered there is the rooster. And that I was thinking about, for Peter, that was one moment, but that one moment really defined him as the world looked at him. That one moment, that's what's remembered. That's literally held over people's heads, and I'm sure it was held over his head of this rooster. And the story going that Peter denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed, which is why the rooster's up there. But just this symbol of failure that the world is holding on to, that so many people hold on to for him, even though he went on to do all these great things that some of which we also talked about on Sunday. But just was really interesting, and just thinking about how the world often wants us to hold on to those places where we feel like we messed up the plan, we fell short, where we went against, and surely we often feel like, well, I've messed this up now. I'm too far gone. God can't fix this. But that clearly wasn't the case for him, and isn't the case for us either.
Yeah, that's very good.
Nicole, you shared something about this kind of in this same thought about the people and God. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that stuck out to me from this message was just the clarification that men killed Jesus and God raised him from the dead. That it wasn't this either or situation. It wasn't, either God is going to save me from men or he's not, and they're going to win. But that both happened, which was kind of, the point of the whole message of, we have our plots, but God's so much greater. He includes them in his plan and uses them to still, accomplish what he wants to for us. We do so often live like, well, God's going to save me from this, or something else is going to win. And that's just, it's not how the world works. That bad things are going to come. Life is not going to be perfect, but God will still win. Regardless of those plots that people may bring against us. That even for Jesus, who was perfect, who lived a perfect life, who never did anything wrong, that men still killed him, and it looked like those plots were winning, but Jesus still rose from the dead. God won in the end. And I think that's hard for us to remember, that we get into those points that's like, oh, it's not working out. What I thought was going to happen isn't. Like, God must not be involved anymore. But he is, and he will still win. So I thought that was really good. Just to remember that, men even killed Jesus. So what makes us think that we shouldn't have to endure hardship? Like, of all of the terrible things that Jesus went through, why do we think that we are so important that we wouldn't have to go through bad things? And God can still win, even though we do go through those.
Man.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, there's so many bad things going on in the world, and it seems in this season even to be easier for us to realize that God promises to walk through the valley of the shadow of death with us, not to prevent us from going through there, not to say, oh, I've got this perfectly paved, nice, level, easy path for you. But time and again through Scripture, the people who were following Jesus, who had great faith, were still had struggles, still had difficulties, and even we think about, as you said, Nicole, that people killed Jesus, but God's plan still went further. And when we think about the ways that we fall short, the ways that we have messed up in our lives, like that's about the worst you can do is killing Jesus. And sometimes I think we may act as though Jesus is dead. We may walk through life that way. But even at that point, God's plan still is able to move forward. And I think a lot of the things that we think that we've really messed up, where there's no coming back from it, isn't that bad. That we think of it as the worst thing ever, but God is still able to work. And the quote from Sunday of God's plan works through the plot to deliver the people according to his plan. That took me 2 or 3 of the times of listening to that, even though Mark repeated it to get it all the way down. But fortunately, we had 3 online gatherings, and the message is still up, and you still listen to it. But so good that there is still grace, there is still hope for us, even in those difficulties, even when we fall short, no matter what degree we fall short. That God is faithful.
Yes. Man, those are some great things, some great things. One of the things that I alluded to with that on Sunday was really any theological framework or system that says that it's really only one or the other, that it's people killing Jesus, people doing what they do, um, people uh, people ruling the world and disrupting um, all things that God intends to happen. It can't be just that, and it can't just be the direction of people didn't kill Jesus. People don't do evil things. People don't have the ability to choose, and it's just all God, and all things that people do are the way that God would want for them to have behaved and done what they did. And so it's always both, right? It's always both. It's always both on a personal level. What's intact? Did I mess up? Did I plot? Did I want to do my own plan? Yes. Does God have a plan? My life, working in my life, that's greater than all that? Yes, right. And that is Harley's observation. That is the grace part, right? That is the grace part um, that he reigns upon us, righteous, unrighteous, whoever we are. His grace is at work like that in the world through all those things. And so on a personal level and in a global, all throughout human history level, both of those things are true. It's um, very hard to wrap our minds around. Well, really impossible for us to wrap our minds around. But anytime there's something like that it is really impossible for us to wrap our minds around, um, I want for that to be a thing that actually leads us into greater worship of Him, because His plan, is that much greater than our plots, I think. So I was amazed by that. It is a picture of grace in every way.
So good, so good. Well, what else stuck out to y'all from Sunday or Friday?
There was one line I actually just saw it in my notes again. That is something I feel like we know as Jesus followers, but it's always good to have a reminder. And it's that there's nothing that we face in this life that Jesus hasn't already gone through and dealt with. Because so often, and I think like it was back from the Rift series, when you talk about that isolation, that the devil wants you to get to a point that you think, oh, I'm the only one who understands what I'm going through. No one else has ever had to, deal with what I'm dealing with. And you get to this point and into this, this rhythm of believing that. And that's where the devil wants to isolate you and keep you from reaching out to other people and to reaching out to Jesus. But the Bible tells us that Jesus went through every form of temptation. And then you think about it, even to death, even to our greatest fear, which, is death and what that brings, because there's so, that unknown is so scary. But Jesus has already been there for us. And so whenever we get into those times of, no one knows how I feel, no one understands me, they don't get it. There's no understanding for what I am dealing with, like Jesus does. And that's what makes the difference in knowing that we can go to Him and that He does understand our pain and our hurt and whatever it is that we're dealing with. And I feel like we forget that a lot of times, but it's true. He's dealt with everything, even unto death, before we have to.
Yes. That is good. Right. You're right. I mean, I have to remind myself of that. We all need reminders of that, right? Not anywhere that I could go or anything I could do and experience that Jesus has not already gone before me. And in some ways, quite literally like that in His experiences with temptation, affliction, even to the point of death, right?
There's such comfort and peace in knowing that and knowing that not only he went through it, but he made it through that, and that we're able to as well.
Yeah.
My favorite thing from Friday was when you were walking through the icons, and specifically the trough. Like, he humbled himself to become like man and like walk through this life for us to see how we should live this life. And like, I wrote down, like, what do I need to do to humble myself to become like him? And I think that goes into where Mark was talking about, like, changing your mindset and fixing your eyes on him, and like knowing that he has put that inside of you, and that is there for you to like cultivate and learn from. So like, I wrote down, like, humble mind, hopeful mind, the mind of Jesus. So like, focusing on that, like, if we can just do that, that's all we need. Like, that grace, like, all of these things just come in, like, your mindset changes everything.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, both on Friday and Sunday, that that underneath it all, I wanted to make the connection. I wanted to make the connection to the good news of Jesus, as Paul was recounting to himself in Philippians chapter 2, of have this mind in yourself. You have this mind in yourself of Jesus. He's given it to you. And then he basically lays out, all of those things of the gospel of, Jesus humbles himself, comes and, empties himself out at the point of death, on the cross. He's exalted. And the same deal with that on Sunday of Peter's greatest issue from the outset of when Jesus lays out his plan. Peter's greatest issue, even though he has the right profession of faith in Jesus and believes that Jesus is the Son of God, his mind is on the things of men, Jesus says. And then when we get to the end of all of that, when we were in Acts, where we found Peter kind of at the end in front of all of the council, most powerful people in the world, like what Jesus had to face himself, he is at a place where he's like, I can't be obedient to the things of men. I've got to be obedient to the things of God. And we see how his mind, like he had the same profession of faith, but his mind had matured and his mind had elevated to that place of that was greatest focus in every point. And that's obviously the challenge, right? The challenge oftentimes is not our faith in Jesus as Jesus followers, even though that is challenging. It is that faith permeating our mindset to go beyond what it is that we see, right? For Paul, it's the prison. For Peter, it's the council of powerful people. And for us, we all have our own things in that. But the mind of Jesus, permeating our mind, that becoming what our mind is like, is a really powerful thing. And so a bigger part of the crucifixion and resurrection Easter weekend than maybe we had previously thought about, for sure. For myself, a bigger piece of maybe we had made before.
Yep, that's good. One of the things I was just thinking about was, with Good Friday, like we think of it as Good Friday because we know of what came on Sunday. Yes. Like we know Friday was good because Easter morning came, and but that first Good Friday did not feel good at all. That felt like, that was the worst day in history. And I was thinking, I think oftentimes we find ourselves in a place where we feel like we are in the worst situation ever. We're in a spot where there is no way out of this. Like this feels like it's done, it's over. But Easter can still come. There is still the opportunity for new life and new hope. And I think that's true in so much of what we've been talking about already this morning. That there is still hope. There is still grace. That no matter what you're going through, no matter what the situation is, no matter how hopeless and dark it is and it looks, that God is still working even when we don't see it. And I think oftentimes we need that reminder. We need that to refresh us and to give us that hope, that God is still God. He's still on his throne. He is still at work, and we may not see it right now, but when we can put our hope and our trust in him, that we know that we'll be able to at some point look back and say, wow, my God moved.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times you hear, like, I mean, whenever we talk about, that God wins in the end, that's because there's something to win against. And like God wins the war. Okay, but there's a war. And so we ignore that side of it. And we know that God wins, but he wins because there's opposition against him. Like, it's so easy to just say that, well, God wins the war. Okay, but there's still a war. And we can't ignore that. And we can't pretend like that's not true. And so that's just kind of what popped in my head, Cameron, while you were talking of like, yeah, Easter is still coming, but because of there was something so terrible to come back from. And we leave that part out once again with that like positivity and just kind of, only focusing on the good things. Well, there are good things to focus on because we go through the bad things. And we wouldn't even know that they're good if we didn't have the bad as well. And that, that's something we talk about a lot of times. Like, obviously that's just how life works and how the world works. But just once again, like that reminder of God wins the war, but there's a war, and that's okay.
Yeah. Something there like that makes me think of like in the grand scheme of all of these things, we're talking about plan, we're talking about the plots of all this, you're right. So there is a war, right? So God wins, we celebrate this, we celebrate really in other words, he has already won, while we look in which him winning becomes very apparent ultimately in a culminating way, right? But something that sometimes that we miss a lot is that if we go all the way back to Genesis, which we had talked about some earlier on in the year, is that the way that darkness and evil is portrayed in the world is that obviously Genesis 3, serpent comes and tempts. The way that that same thing is described in Genesis 4 in the Cain and Abel narrative is that sin is crouching at the door, like ready to attack you, right? And oftentimes one of the things that we've missed in a lot of Christian circles and theology is we just only say there's just a sinful nature to humanity now that we are fallen, and we have we're born with a natural tendency or a condition toward that which is not God or pleasing to ourselves, or whatever description we want to give to that. But what we miss a lot is that the narrative of Scripture actually ascribes to sin a persona that is against us. That's not just like a thing on the inside that we chose, or a thing on the inside that now we're naturally born with as fallen humanity, but actually an external thing that wants to take you out, right? And so it's sin and the devil and darkness, and all of that is a force that is waiting for that which is already weak and frayed on the inside of us to present a good opportunity to demolish us. And so that's a real thing that that theologically that we think about, and a lot of Christians have been opposed to that because we definitely don't want to fall into the kind of theology where everything in the world is just a battle between two forces of good and evil, or a battle between a good thing that is God and a bad thing that is the devil, as though that they are equal. And without talking about any of these things on Sunday, that is still in the backdrop of my own theological thinking about all of these things, is that God's plan and God, which where I've landed with, it really comes down to who is greater. God is greater, right? Like make no mistake, what we see in Scripture is God is greater. than that sin that is on the inside of us. God is greater than that sin that is crouching at the door, waiting for us. God is greater than the enemy who is like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. God is greater. But all of those things for sure are forces and factors in the world in which we exist in. And those are all things that, like you're right, there's a war. And it's sometimes it's a war that we don't want to acknowledge. We don't want to acknowledge that it's there, because one, that's a little freaky, right? Two, it's scary, and but it is nonetheless, a thing that is there. But right, instead of us living our life in a place of fear, as though that is a greater thing, that those plots against us are a greater thing, I want to be reassured that even in those plots that are potent and powerful in and of themselves, God's so much greater than all of it, that not only does he have those things, but even if there's an ill intent plot that happens to you, God actually takes that and brings out of it beautiful, beautiful things in us. And that's the thing that, I don't know, again, can't even begin to, but just get to the tip of the iceberg of how amazing that is about who God is and how much greater he is, how much greater his plan is, right? In all those ways. But yeah, that's a good thought. There is a war, right? Yeah.
That's good. Real good. Anybody have anything else they want to share?
I have a brief little thought. Kind of going off what Mark just said. Like, I wrote down and highlighted in my little notebook, like, this has been God's plan from the foundation of the world. And I think that's something that's really hard to grasp, because like when things are happening, you're like, oh, this is just happening. Like, this has been like years and years and years in the making, and like God knew about this before you were ever even thought of. I don't know, that just like put things into perspective, I guess, because it's just really the foundation of the world. Like, the time period that is just, I can't even grasp it.
Yeah. I think all of this makes us begin to recognize how little we understand and how little how small we often view God. That God is so much greater, so much more powerful, so much bigger than anything we can comprehend. And I think sometimes we say that, but we don't often recognize quite how the implications for all of that. Just how much he is able to do, and all that. Anybody else? We good? Well, thank you for joining this week's collective conversation. As we mentioned last week, maybe in all of this, as we talked a little bit about, maybe you're feeling isolated, you're feeling alone, you need somebody to reach out to. Please shoot us a message, send us an email. We'd be happy to talk with you and help you out in any way that we can. This week, we've got some exciting things planned for Sunday. Mark's working hard to, make sure that this week is a great message. We were giving him a hard time about, don't let this one be a letdown. But you got it, Mark. You'll be all right. But what we're excited about to this Sunday and seeing how God continues to work, continues to move. If you've got a story of how God has worked in this time, something you've seen, something you've experienced, please feel free and please do reach out to us, share that. We love hearing those stories and want to be able to share those in the weeks and months to come as well. We hope you have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you online on Sunday.